On Carl Jung, An Introduction to Archetypes and Analytical Psychology. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The purpose of this video is to provide students with an overview of some of Carl Jung's most significant concepts, including psyche, personal conscious, personal unconscious, ego, collective unconscious, archetypes, subliminal, complexes, persona, shadow, individuation, anima, and animus. Early life. Carl Gustav Jung was born in Keswil, Switzerland on July 26, 1875. His father, Paul Achilles Jung, was a Swiss Reformed church pastor, while his mother, Amelie Presswick, was the daughter of renowned Reformed Lutheran theologian Samuel Presswick. Amelie was an unconventional woman who seemed to have two distinct personalities. One personality, through which she lived during the day, was of the devoted housewife. But, Jung wrote, her personality would change once evening came and a different personality emerged. Amelie would retire to her bedroom where she believed she was visited by spirits with whom she communed, including a glowing, disembodied entity that would float around the room. Although they led to her being hospitalized for several months, Amelie's spirited and earnest descriptions of these visions inspired an intense metaphysical interest in Jung, eventually leading to his studies into the psyche, the persona and shadow, and eventual discovery of the collective unconscious. Analytical psychology. Jung initially wanted to study archaeology, but due to financial constraints, he went on to study psychiatry and medicine at the University of Basel. Through these studies, he eventually developed a 7-year collaborative study into psychoanalysis alongside famed Austrian psychiatrist Sigmund Freud. In 1912, Jung published The Psychology of the Unconscious, in which he established the early principles of analytical psychology. As opposed to Freud's materialist approach, which emphasized humanity's will to pleasure, Jung's analytical psychology described our psyches as a complex interchange of philosophical values, primordial symbols, and a desire for self-fulfillment. Freud took this departure personally, leading to an irreparable tear between the two that never healed. The psyche. The fundamental unit of Carl Jung's analytical psychology is the psyche. The psyche refers to a person's complete mind, our total personality, including the aspects of which we are aware, the conscious, and unaware, personal and collective unconscious, and the mechanism that regulates which experiences go where, the ego. In Jung's model, there's no wall separating the conscious from the unconscious parts of our psyche. There's interchange and development, and most importantly, there's the potential to assimilate the unconscious into the conscious and discover our true self, a process which Jung called individuation. The personal conscious and unconscious, and dynamic polarities. The conscious part of the psyche is exactly what it sounds like, the things about which we are conscious or aware. It's made up of our personal experiences and the memories, ideas, thoughts, and feelings we have about them, about which we are aware and can recall. The unconscious part of the psyche is divided into two parts, the personal and collective unconscious. The personal unconscious is populated by our experiences about which we are not aware or cannot recall. Although we're not aware of them, they still influence our beliefs and actions. For example, you might have a fear of warm stoves stemming from having burned your hand on one as a toddler, an experience you don't recall but continues to frighten you as an adult nonetheless. The collective unconscious is populated by the archetypes, images and symbols that were experienced by ancestral humans which influence our thinking today, what we would call genetic memories. Jung also identifies a fourth aspect of the psyche, which he calls dynamic polarities, which include the tensions between our conscious and unconscious lives, introversion and extroversion, and so forth. The aim of Jungian psychology is to achieve balance among these four aspects of the psyche to create a well-adjusted individual through proper use of the ego. The psyche is regulated by a mechanism Jung called the ego. The ego forms, as it were, the center of the field of consciousness, and insofar as this comprises the empirical personality, the ego is the subject of all personal acts of consciousness. The ego works as a gatekeeper, determining which experiences pass into a person's conscious and which are shuffled into the personal unconscious, where they're suppressed. The experiences that are passed into the unconscious are absorbed subliminally, below the threshold of what's conscious, but still exert an influence on us, unbeknownst to us. There are certain events of which we have not consciously taken note. They have remained below the threshold of consciousness. They have happened, but they have been absorbed subliminally. The ego filters these experiences into the personal unconscious for several reasons. For example, the experiences might seem insignificant, something like a kind or mean word someone says to us or the way they looked at us. Or they might be so traumatic that a person doesn't want to deal with them. In any event, the ego files these experiences into the personal unconscious, which exert influence outside our field of awareness, the things about which we're aware, causing complexes. Complexes. One way in which the personal unconscious influences a person's behavior is through complexes. These are a type of subpersonality which heavily influence our thoughts and emotions and therefore our actions. Going back to our earlier example, as a child, you may have burned your hand on a hot stove. This can give you a complex about stoves or hot items. Jung likely first encountered the general concept of complexes through his studies with Sigmund Freud. Freud believed that complexes arose out of an unresolved early childhood trauma, but Jung concluded there was a less personal and far more spiritual cause for them, something that originated within the sum of humanity's collective experiences and felt by every individual human being. This led Jung to believe in an unconscious realm that was deeper than the personal unconscious, the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious. Jung recalled that, as a child, without knowing why, he once carved a face into a wooden ruler, which he placed along with a stone into a ruler case. He hid the ruler case in his attic and would secretly visit it from time to time, reading messages which he'd written in a language he believed he invented. Jung believed this ceremony was very similar to totem and stone collecting rituals practiced by distant indigenous tribes about which he'd never read or visited. Jung wondered how it could be that he intuitively mimicked ancient ceremonies that were entirely alien to his Protestant upbringing. This curiosity led Jung to study world religions, during which he found wide-ranging patterns of belief systems expressed through symbolism, which Jung called archetypes. His recognition of these patterns formed the foundation of the idea for which Jung is best known, the collective unconscious. Whereas the personal unconscious is composed of an individual's suppressed personal experiences the ego rejects, the collective unconscious is a psychic reservoir of humanity's collective ancestral experiences, which influence and inform us at an unconscious level. We can also find in the unconscious qualities that are not individually acquired but are inherited. For example, instincts as impulses to carry out actions from necessity without conscious motivation. In this deeper stratum, we find archetypes. The instincts and archetypes together form the collective unconscious. I call them collective because, unlike the personal unconscious, it is not made up of individual and more or less unique contents, but of those which are universal and of regular occurrence. Therefore, the archetypes are psychic structures intuitively understood by all humans. They influence the way each of us perceives and therefore think about the world. Examples include the shared intuitive understanding of what it is to be a hero or villain, or the symbolism of birth, death, rebirth, and even floods. Jung believed that the archetypes are a feature of human evolution. Just as the body has evolved, so has the mind, and the archetypes are an artifact from our primitive selves. Just as the human body represents a whole museum of organs, each with a long evolutionary history behind it, so we should expect to find that the mind is organized in a similar way. It can no more be a product without history than is the body in which it exists. Although the archetypes are common to everyone's psyche, we each interact with them uniquely. They therefore integrate and shape each personality individually. That integration is the work of the individual who wants to be well-adjusted, to confront the unconscious and to make it conscious. For the sake of mental stability and even psychological health, the unconscious and the conscious must be integrally connected and thus move on parallel lines. If they are split apart or disassociated, psychological disturbance follows. Jung called this process of bringing the unconscious into the conscious individuation. Individuation. Individuation is the process of confronting one's unconscious to integrate it into the conscious towards the goal of becoming a fully realized individual. Individuation means becoming a single, homogeneous being, and insofar as individuality embraces our innermost, last, and incomparable uniqueness, it also implies becoming one's own self. We could therefore translate individuation as self-realization. Again, Jung's conception of the psyche, the total personality, is comprised of conscious and unconscious, personal and collective aspects. Perhaps the most significant component of the conscious mind is the persona, which is the mask we show the world. A kind of mask designed on the one hand to make a definite impression upon others, and on the other to conceal the true nature of the individual. While our persona plays a significant role in facilitating our social lives, it's the rhetorical face we show the world through which we make social connections, we must keep in mind that it's not fundamentally real. It's a low-resolution avatar we wear to make life simpler. Fundamentally, the persona is nothing real. It is a compromise between the individual and society as to what a man should appear to be. The persona is a semblance, a two-dimensional reality. During individuation, a person realizes that their conscious persona is only one aspect of their psyche. There also resides in the personal unconscious one's shadow, the elements of a person found in their unconscious. Because people tend to ignore the negative aspects of their personalities, most of what we find in the shadow is negative. If and when an individual makes an attempt to see his shadow, he becomes aware of and often ashamed of those qualities and impulses he denies in himself but can plainly see in others. Such things as egotism, mental laziness and sloppiness, unreal fantasies, schemes and plots, carelessness and cowardice, inordinate love of money and possessions. However, in a full examination of oneself necessary for individuation, it is imperative that we explore the shadow to understand all of what we truly are, if for no other reason than to become a better person. For while a person who explores their shadow can avoid being dominated by it, whoever ignores their shadow gives it the darkness it needs to grow darker. Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. If an inferiority is conscious, one always has a chance to correct it. But if it is repressed and isolated from consciousness, it never gets corrected. This engagement with the shadow happens in 4 stages. First, appearance of the shadow, which oftentimes happens in dreams or visions. Second, encountering the shadow happens when a person makes an effort to discover this hidden aspect of their personality. Third, merging with the shadow happens when a person's ego begins to pass the contents of the shadow into the persona. Finally, assimilation of the shadow occurs when one maintains an awareness of their shadow, but doesn't come to identify with it. According to Jung, this process of shadow assimilation can be therapeutic. It helps us resolve a lot of the "why am I like this?" questioning that can dominate our consciously motivated actions, particularly the self-destructive ones, which allows us to take control of our otherwise chaotic lives. The anima and the animus. Jung identified two examples of archetypes in each of us, the anima/animus. In short, these are the unconscious personality influences that are opposite to our actual sexual identities. The anima is the feminine side found in men's personalities, especially those that reflect a spiritual nature. This side includes intuition, creativity, and psychic sensitivity towards others. Conversely, Jung identifies the animus, the inner masculine side found in women, representing rationality, courage, and desire. The purpose of the anima and animus is not to reinforce sex stereotypes, but rather to connect people to the broad range of human experiences via the collective unconscious. The natural function of the animus, as well as the anima, is to remain in place between individual consciousness and the collective unconscious. Exactly as the persona is a sort of stratum between the ego consciousness and the objects of the external world. The animus and the anima should function as a bridge or a door leading to the images of the collective unconscious, as the persona should be a sort of bridge into the world. Successfully assimilating the anima and animus gives a person access to what Jung described as the ultimate layer of the psyche, the self. The self is our life's goal, for it is the completest expression of that fateful combination we call individuality. The self is the unified psyche, the psyche which has intentionally and consciously assimilated the shadow and persona. The point of it all? This brings us to the whole point of Jungian psychology, to discover and create a self that is a well-balanced, well-adjusted individual who encounters life as it is, which happens to also be the point of education generally, to discover the universe and every subject within it as it truly is. Only when we know who we are can we understand how we fit into this universe. And it's only when we know how we fit into it can we hope to find our meaning and purpose for existing within it. Thank you very much for watching. Me and Theodore really appreciate it. We hope it was useful for you in some way. Until our next video, be well.